you look at a country like Turkey, it ran the caliphate prior to now the Islamic State during the Ottoman Empire. And I think the president of Turkey, Erdogan, is not only Islamist, but I think these radical Sunnis genuinely believe in the idea of an Islamic State, in a caliphate. This is a hardcore religious dogma that they adhere to. And I think that they are trying to spread this. And so it would not surprise me if Turkey tried to be the seat, once again, of this caliphate.
A must-own gold stock. Head of exploration is the man responsible for the largest gold discovery in history. Gold production will commence in the matter of weeks for this new company, headed up by an all-star management team. Their core project and mine was purchased by Barrick Gold at the height of the bull market in 2006 for $142 million. At the depths of the bear market, this management team swooped in and bought this project for $2 million last year. To learn more about this soon-to-be mid-tier gold producer with a cash cost estimated at a low $600 per ounce, visit crushthestreet.com/gold-IPO.
Hello everyone, and welcome into crushthestreet.com. I'm Kenneth Amaduri. Thanks for joining me today. Today I have on the line again Fabian Calvo. He's of FabianForLiberty.com. He's got a YouTube channel, and he's now hosting a daily podcast, which all can be found on his website, FabianForLiberty.com. Fabian, thanks for joining me today.
Hey, Kenneth, thanks for having me back on.
Fabian, I want to start off our discussion here with the eruptions and the problems that we're seeing in Turkey. And by the way, it seems like every other day now things are unfolding on us with shootings and different things around the world. And I don't know, maybe it's just, I'm noticing it more now, and it was happening years ago, but it just seems to be happening quite often now. And in Turkey right now, we have the military coup. And I know you did an update on this, and you made some interesting points as to whether or not it was a legitimate uprising or simply staged. So I want to get your thoughts on this.
Sure. Well, at this point, look, when it broke on Friday, my first thoughts were who's backing the coup. Historically, we know that coups are usually backed and or financed, as we saw, for example, with the Arab Spring, by either the West or, in some cases, the Russians. And so that was the point that I brought up when it was breaking before all this information was coming out. But, with what's happened over the last week, seeing that the president of Turkey has, in essence, not only full-blown crackdown, and this was happening prior to the coup as well, where he had, in essence, taken over the media, shut down the rights of the media and the free press. Now he's gone after the educational system. Over 6,000 individuals from the military have been put in prison. So all these different things that have been happening, to me, signal that this very likely could have been staged. And there's a couple different reasons why I think this, Kenneth. The biggest red flag of all, though, is that when the military supposedly that they were basically embarking on this coup, apparently F-15s, under the control of those that were in support of the coup, actually flew by and knew the locations of the president's airplane and did not shoot it down. And look, there was a coup there was a coup in the 60s in Turkey, and basically they got the then president and they basically hung him in the streets. That's what happens with coups, right? The people that are in charge usually leave the country or they're killed, murdered, whatever. And that did not take place. Another thing, too, that was a red flag was that there was no leader of the coup. The current, Erdogan is blaming it on some cleric that lives in some compound in Pennsylvania, but there was no leader of the actual coup in Turkey. They supposedly took over a TV station, and nobody was giving any direction or taking responsibility for being in charge of the coup. So there's a lot of red flags with that. Also a lot of red flags with respect to Turkey's involvement with ISIS that I think are pretty alarming.
Yeah. Fabian, interesting points there. And I just want to, ask you, what would be the incentive for the president, for the country, and just kind of give us the background here for why they would potentially stage this military coup?
Well, that's interesting. I think that, I have no evidence of this, but for me, Kenneth, I think there could be a potential deal in the works. There's a couple different scenarios here. One is there could be a potential deal in the works between the West and Turkey. And what that deal basically would look like is that we would give, the West would give cover to the president of Turkey to, in essence, stage this coup, execute it, seize total control, rewrite the constitution, and the West would in turn be allowed to use Turkey as a springboard to take out ISIS in Syria. Now, the other potential here is that the elements that have financed and created ISIS in the West are now indirectly supporting Turkey, who is you can make a pretty good argument that Turkey is an ally of ISIS in the sense that they were financing them with oil sales. You had a former ISIS operative that went public, that basically left ISIS, saying that ISIS high commanders were given instructions that they could maneuver in and out of that Turkish border, that the Turkish military was in cooperation with ISIS. We had special forces raid the equivalent of the CFO of ISIS back in January, claiming that they had found multiple hard drives with direct connections between high-ranking Turkish officials and high-ranking ISIS officials, showing collaboration and collusion. And then the most important thing that I think is, which will reveal a lot, is WikiLeaks is threatened to release 100,000 plus pages related to this coup, and they're claiming now that they have come under massive cyber attacks. Now, Turkey may have that ability to wage massive cyber attacks, but I think the United States and certainly the West has one of the largest armies of cyber warriors, if you will, capable of going after WikiLeaks. So there's a lot of different angles here, but I think it could be a deal by the West and Turkey, or it could be Turkey potentially siding with ISIS to form a larger caliphate, believe it or not. I mean, the president of Turkey is an Islamist. He has sympathies with the Sunni radicals, and his intentions are, in my opinion, to basically try to offset the balance of power against the Shias that are in Iran, Iraq, and in Syria.
Fabian, I want to bring up another topic into this picture, and it's certainly related, but it wasn't that long ago that a 28-page 9/11 inquiry was released, and it was classified information that was kept secret for years because it linked people involved to 9/11 from Saudi Arabia. And I got to ask you, maybe we'll ask it like this: why did we not invade Saudi Arabia back in 2001?
That's a great question, Kenneth. I mean, look, I think this is obviously a financial deal. Everybody knows, or I would assume many of your listeners know about the petrodollar, that Saudi Arabia plays a very, very important role in the propping up of the U.S. dollar by allowing their oil sales to be purchased only in U.S. And that's the rub there, right? That's why, you look at a country like Saudi Arabia, their human rights records is equal, if not worse, than those of Iran. Saudi Arabia has executed more people than ISIS. Saudi Arabia has a dismal record against women, against gays. I mean, it's a complete totalitarian regime, yet we consider them, not we, but the United States considers them one of our strongest allies in the region. And the question begs is, why the double standard, right? Why the hypocrisy? And of course, it's economic. Now, with the 28-page report, look, this is one of those things, Kenneth, where conspiracy theory now has become conspiracy fact, as is often mentioned. And going back to 2001, there was a lot of people that were looking at the Saudi Arabia ties to 9/11. Now it is of record. In fact, people that have gone public after viewing those 28 pages believe that is the case. And I think when those 28 pages are revealed and released, it's going to show a direct link between the financing of the 19 Saudi hijackers, who were, again, all of them were Saudis. I think that this was a Saudi-supported mission. I think it was in collusion with rogue elements of the U.S. government, and in essence, they got away with it. And now, 15 years later, they're coming out with this report. It'll probably be, page 10 on the New York Times. Nobody will care, and it's unfortunate. But look, there's absolutely a link, not only between the Saudis and 9/11, but between the Saudis and the financing of radical Wahhabist Islamic radicals around the world.
So Fabian, in relation to Turkey and the military coup that we're seeing, I mean, what are some potential links to these two different stories here? Is it coming down to the petrodollar and the control of the West over the financial interests?
I think certainly that plays a role. I think with respect to the Turkish coup, and again, I have no evidence. This is based on my my studies of history. You look at a country like Turkey. It ran the caliphate prior to now the Islamic State during the Ottoman Empire, and I think the president of Turkey, Erdogan, is not only Islamist, but I think these radical Sunnis genuinely believe in the idea of an Islamic State, in a caliphate. This is a hardcore religious dogma that they adhere to. And I think that they are trying to spread this. And so it would not surprise me if Turkey tried to be the seat, once again, of this caliphate by openly allying with ISIS. And it potentially is something that could be supported by the West as a buffer against the Russians. I've always said ISIS would be used by the West to go to as a proxy against the Russians, and we see that playing out in Syria to an extent. We also know that there's bad blood between Turkey and the Russians as well. So, it's one of those things, Kenneth, where there's so many different moving parts. You could take every geopolitical analyst out there, and almost all of them will give you a different opinion and different story, because the things that are happening are so contrary almost to things that have happened prior in history, although there's a lot of common themes. But it is a world that is so incredibly insane. At the beginning of the interview and before we started talking, before we started recording, we were talking about how these events are speeding up, whether it is, cops being killed in the United States, or the Turkish coup, or economic news, or terrorist attacks. It seems like there's like this quickening taking place, and really I think that it's kind of one of those kind of hockey sticks exponential growth, that when things really start to take off, they just go absolutely vertical, and I think that's what we're seeing. And so it's hard to kind of be able to kind of keep this all in kind of a historical lens, or rationalize some of the things that are taking place. But I do believe fundamentally that these events, these geopolitical events, all come down to economics in one way or another.
Yeah, that's one of the things that it's been on my mind. When you see a breakdown in the financial world, the economy, people don't have money, they don't have jobs, they resort to violence, and I think that's where the root is in almost every place we look around the world. And I do want to transition over into the economy now. We did have an interesting conversation with Rick Ackerman, a debate between you and him, talking about the conversation of helicopter money. And, in between that conversation and now, we've seen a backdoor bailout come from the Fed to allow banks to buy back their own stock. And, it's kind of been an ongoing question I've been asking in some of my interviews, but it's simply a Band-Aid to cover up the injury of all the past economic stimulus and growth, and they're just trying to kick this can down the road, and we're seeing the 1% of 1% benefiting, and that's true of the backdoor bailouts that the banks got for being able to purchase their own stock, drive up their share price, and the elites of the system get wealthier. So I just want to get your closing thoughts here on, the economy and the direction, and are things playing out as you thought they would?
Well, yeah, I think they are. I mean, look, yesterday we saw the stock market hit 18,600. Of course, it's all manipulated. I've been saying now for a few years we're going to see the Dow Jones hit 20,000. Most recently, I was talking about it hitting 19,000 by the end of summer, 20,000 prior to this election. Again, where politics and economics are merging, the establishment, the 1% of 1% are in the bag for Hillary Clinton. So they want to keep this zombie economy alive to get her elected. And we see monetary stimulus that has failed miserably. Over 600 interest rate cuts globally, over $14 trillion in asset purchases since 2008 by central banks. None of it has worked. Negative interest rates aren't working. Quantitative easing hasn't working. So the next the next thing that they're going to roll out is helicopter money, and we'll likely see Japan begin to use that money manipulation tool. But it's important to note, Kenneth, that this isn't just me saying this. As I mentioned in the interview, in the debate with Rick, we have some of the biggest financial minds on the planet talking about this. People like Ray Dalio and many others. HSBC has come out talking about this, Goldman Sachs. But most recently, we had Bill Gross, one of the most influential investors alive today, coming out and saying helicopter money is needed. What was interesting is that he was talking about it needed to not only create inflation, but he was talking about how it was needed because the robots are going to replace about 30 to 40% of jobs, so that the United States and the West is going to have to look at a basic universal income where everyone in America gets $10,000 a year by the federal government to offset the loss of jobs and also this robot revolution that we're seeing take place right now. So, it's something that is bound to happen. I was talking about this yesterday. It is something we could potentially see, depending on how weak the economy gets between now and the election. We could potentially see this prior to the election. I certainly think it's something that we will see begin to be rolled out in countries between the next 6 and 12 months, countries in the West.
Fabian, do you think that people are going to view the stock market as a safe haven or a hedge against inflation as helicopter money gets implemented and exponentially increases in our system?
Well, that's a great question, Kenneth. Unfortunately, as much as I hate and it pains me to say this, is the answer to that question is yes. When I talk about the zombie economy, it's not just the actual economy itself that is almost like a character out of The Walking Dead. It's actually individuals that are participating in the economy as well, that are almost in this sleep state where their involvement in the economy is basically limited to turning on the news from time to time. They see the little green arrow on the right-hand side of the box saying that, all-time high for the stock market. Every month they get their statement either emailed or sent to them in the mail. They see it's going up, hence the wealth effect that the Federal Reserve is creating. And that's the extent of their participation or their understanding of the economy. And so when that is happening, which is what they're trying to do, they're trying to increase the valuations of house prices. They're trying to increase the valuations of stocks. They've been very successful at doing it. I should note it's going to end very badly. It always does. When that will happen, perhaps middle to end of next year, depending on who wins this presidential election. But yeah, I think that people will, as the stock market grows, which is something that they always do, right? If you see, for example, Fortune 100 companies and really just companies on Wall Street doing major buyback of their shares, or you see still Wall Street and hedge funds own a majority of foreclosed real estate from 2008. Remember that these individuals, these Ivy Leaguers, have the boom and bust cycles down to an absolute science. So the bust will happen as soon as we begin to see these companies and these individuals and these corporations unload those assets to the unsuspecting middle class. That is starting to happen, but it hasn't happened just yet. And I think that will be a great indicator of a financial crash is near.
Yeah. Well, the stock market has definitely been the propaganda average and probably one of the most notable and biggest proponents and metrics for the media and the government's propaganda that they continuously push, because when people see that, they see the stock market go up, they feel wealthier, and they think things are on the right track. So Fabian, please share with us where people can go if they want to visit your work and read about the content that you provide and watch and listen to the podcasts and videos you do.
Yeah, they could all just go to Fabian, the number 4, Fabian4Liberty.com, Fabian4Liberty.com on iTunes. The new podcast will be up in a couple of days. It's called Get Current, Economics, Entrepreneurship, and More. But they could get all that information.
So is the podcast going to be different than what you do on YouTube?
The podcast is going to cover current events, but it's going to really dive deeper into economics and entrepreneurship. I did a call the other day, Kenneth, that And I often talk about, I think despite some of the kind of, some of the things we've talked about today, I really still believe we're in what's called the golden age of business for a variety of different reasons. But to really drive that point home, the other day I actually was on a conference call with a few hundred people, and I started off the call. It was an economic forecast call, and I started off the call talking about opportunity. And I actually quoted or used material from one of the most bearish individuals that you could find, which is a gentleman by the name of James Wesley Rawls. Many of your audience likely know who he is. He's written some great fiction books, and I think he's the editor to survivalblog.net or .com. And even he was talking about the opportunities that lie in this current economy and when the financial crash happens. And I thought it was an interesting article, and I went over it. So yeah, I'm going to be talking a lot about solutions. I think solutions are important. I could sit here and talk about the problems all day, but what is the average listener that's listening right now? What can they do?
Yeah.
And there's a lot of things that we as individuals can do to ensure that, we're not part of the masses that get wiped out or are dependent on government when the crash does happen.
Yeah, it's true. What good is it to continue living if you think things are just going to continue to get worse for you and for everyone around you? You might see it happening, but you got to constantly be looking for solution and ways to survive and thrive, and essentially just enjoy the days that you have on this earth, because each day that goes by, that's one day closer than you are to the day you go in the ground. So Fabian, thanks for coming on the show with me today.
Yeah, Kenneth, you bet. Thanks for having me on.